Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss Boris Johnson's latest empty-headed attempt during an interview to demonstrate yet again that this man is not an intellectual on any level. So I really wish people would stop saying that he is. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So it's fairly clear in the here and now that it's widely accepted that Boris Johnson is simply not up to the job of governing the country. He's not fit to be Prime Minister. Naturally, those of us on the left never believed that he was. However, he had support in the Conservative Party, on the right of politics in general, and even amongst the public, not always the right-leaning section of the public as well, because it appears that coming across as some sort of jovial buffoon actually plays quite well to ordinary people in this country. But now Conservatives have turned against him on both wings of the party, as we'll be hearing more as this week progresses, and the public mood is very much against him as well. Now, I'm not saying he has no support at all in politics or in the public, but the support he does have is on an individual basis. What I mean by that is there's no block anywhere, there's no section of politics, no section of the general population that is a Boris Johnson supporter. Only individuals spread across politics and the population. He has no support on the far right of politics, other than again on an individual basis, because they're upset about his COVID measures, like making them wear masks in shops, for example. But he also has no support amongst, around the centre of politics, who are not at all impressed with his failure to get to grips with the pandemic, as well as a few other things. But what really gets me is the sheer number of people who behave as if he's just not the same man. The reason for this cock-up is because it's not the Boris Johnson that was. COVID changed him. He lost his mojo since becoming infected, is a line that keeps coming up. People who've known him for decades describe a powerful intellect who would discuss complex topics for hours on end, and now they look at him and wonder what happened. The number of accounts I see of people that have worked with him in the past and going, oh, he was a really clever bloke, but I can't square that with how he is governing the country right now. They can't understand it. What's happened to him, they say? Well, I'll tell you what's happened. Sweet FA. Nothing at all has happened to him. He was always like this. He's not clever, and he never was. This weekend, he conducted an interview with a news outlet from the north of England, my part of the country, and he called for this interview in order to garner support in the north by reminding them about his massive investment plans for the NHS. NHS, really important throughout the UK, but in the north of England it's a top issue, and he promised a lot of NHS investment last year ahead of the general election. So on this particular occasion, he wanted to tell them about big investment plans for Leeds, which is the largest city in Yorkshire. Now, and I need to emphasise this, Johnson called for this interview to discuss this topic. It's always possible to catch any Prime Minister out, even a good one, with an unexpected question. You expect a competent Prime Minister to be on top of their brief, which is to say they've read up on what they're going to be talking about. You don't expect them to know every detail about every policy, without some advance notice. That's not reasonable. But this was the topic that Boris Johnson brought up. He talked about a big investment at a hospital in Leeds. How big? Asked the journalist interviewing him. Oh, big. Yeah, but how big? Johnson didn't know. So he picked up his papers from around his feet on the floor, his notes. No problem. I don't have a problem with that. I have no issue with politicians referring to their notes. That's what they're there for. Again, don't expect them to be a human encyclopedia. He couldn't find the figure. It wasn't in there. He read from his notes and just basically read out lines from it. Yeah, we know you can read, Boris. We know that. You went to university, remember? What we want to know is what's the figure. So he just repeated these lines that didn't mention the figure. Nothing. He even tried calling across at presumably his aides to ask them what it was. And this, for me, says it all about Boris Johnson's government. He went along there specifically. I'm not even going to talk about the fact he forgot who was interviewing him. Never mind that. That's irrelevant. I'm not going to poke at that. He went there specifically to talk about a hospital investment, but he knew nothing about it. He knew he was going to be asked questions. What sort of questions does he think he was going to be asked, for goodness sake? You know, he didn't even know the amount of money that he was talking about investing, even though whenever he does quote money about investments, when you actually look at the detail, it's very rarely new money. It's usually money that was announced sometimes years ago. Sometimes the money he talks about as being new is actually from Theresa May's time sometimes. And it was an obvious question, and yet he didn't make sure that he had it on his notes. I didn't expect him to have it in his head, although it would have been nice. Didn't even have it on his notes, much less in his head. And I'll tell you something else suggested by this as well, because we know he picked up his notes, couldn't find it in his notes. So that means it's not just Boris Johnson that wasn't clever enough to predict this, most predictable of questions. But nor did the people paid to make sure his interview went well. He didn't go to that interview because he was sort of blocked into it. This wasn't like PMQs where he asked to do it. He called for it. This was his way, when he's facing a lot of criticism, to go out and try and announce something to get him back on the good books with the public. This interview needed to go well, and they had no reason to expect it wouldn't go well. The people paid to make sure it went smoothly also didn't anticipate that. Are you kidding me? What does that tell you about the officials and advisors that he's chosen to surround himself with? Now, take myself, teacher, just do it part-time now because I'm doing this. This is nice. But when I was teaching full-time, you know, I would teach subjects that were within my specialism, of course. I didn't go off teaching French or anything. But in preparing, I would furnish myself with a few interesting facts and figures on what I would be talking about. You know, a few little things. So I had a bit of interest. I wouldn't even remember them a couple of weeks later in all likelihood. But I would remember them for that lesson. And if it was the sort of thing I wouldn't remember, it would be up on my presentation, or I'd have some notes. I used to have notes. Boris Johnson was way less prepared for an interview, which is a pretty rare event. He doesn't do them very often. Less well prepared for that than a teacher is for the 17 different lessons that they teach a week when working full-time. And like I said, this isn't just laziness. People will point to it, oh, well, he's not a details man. It's an idleness thing. No. Everyone accepts that he's lazy. Not anticipating that question was stupid. It belied a lack of even moderate intelligence. That's not laziness. You know, just your brain would leap out with that. If you were going, what's this interview going to be about? Oh, it's going to be about this Prime Minister. Okay, my notes, right, okay. What are we talking about? You're talking about this big investment in Leeds at the hospital. You know, some investment building up the NHS. Oh, great. How much are we putting in? That would be an obvious question. That would be obvious. So hopefully you can now understand why it gets my goat when people claim that Boris Johnson has gone off the boil or that COVID has affected him. Because this is who he is. And it's who he's always been. This was the latest example. Yes, this is post-COVID. But bear in mind that Boris Johnson didn't just come out of the blue last year. He's been out and about for a long time. He was mayor of London before entering Parliament. He entered politics over a decade ago. And the way he's been behaving as Prime Minister is no different to how he behaved as Mayor of London. He made bold spending promises that didn't materialise. He denied rumours that he was planning on axing public services. Of course he was going to protect public services, and then axed them anyway. He put on this pretence of bumbling in a way that appeals to so many people for some reason. But he had no substance then, this was a long time ago, no follow-through whatsoever on any of his grand plans. Then lo and behold, he becomes Prime Minister. What does he do? Immediately announces a load of grand plans. He's going to level up Britain, he says. Level up the north of England, level up Scotland, level up everywhere. When we're looking back on this in a few years' time, it would be an act of madness at this point to think that we'll be looking back on those grand plans coming to fruition. They will not. We'll be looking back on them in exactly the same way we now look on his time as Mayor of London. It will transpire that he's absolutely spent a load of money. Oh yes, the spending commitments were there. Absolutely. Some of that money inevitably will have been spent on someone he's been shagging. But we will have nothing to show for it. There's been no difference with Boris Johnson since he recovered from COVID and how he was before. He has exactly the same attitude, the same manner, and he still says and does the same stupid things in the same stupid way. The bottom line is that there are people close to him trying to claim that he was sharp and he's gone off the boil, for which there are only two possible explanations to my mind. One, some of these people may genuinely have thought he was clever. Oh, I talked to him at great length about these things. Oh, he was very clever. That basically means you aren't. Johnson has never said anything clever in his life as far as I can tell. He famously used to draw inspiration before writing his articles for The Spectator by shouting at a houseplant. Second possibility, they supported Johnson last year because he would get them through the Brexit deadlock and an inevitable general election. If they did not get a prime minister that could have done what he did at the end of last year, we were going to be having a people's referendum this year. That was inevitable at that point. That was the way it was going to go. That was the only other way to break the deadlock. It was either a general election that the Conservatives could win and get a majority back, and he was the only one it was felt could deliver it. That was it. They knew he couldn't solve a crisis. Even at the time, you had people who knew that Boris Johnson was not a man of substance, not a man of intellect. They went for him just to get past that thing. They weren't expecting a major crisis this year. They thought, things would just rumble along. Now, or at least there wouldn't be a crisis not of their own making, But now that Johnson has been exposed because there was a real crisis, so too has their judgment. So what they're doing is hiding behind the notion that Boris Johnson, who has cocked everything up, is not the same Boris Johnson they supported. Oh, he's a changed man. That's not the Boris Johnson we elected leader last year. But he was cocking it all up before he ever contracted COVID. So that's not washing. He isn't clever. He just refers to the odd Latin phrase to sound clever for those who confuse reading with intelligence. The same people who think Dominic Cummings must be clever because he's well read. Oh, he reads so much stuff, he must be clever. Americans call it book smart, I think. That's nice for a game of Trivial Pursuit, but of sod all use when trying to do things that nobody has done before. Because you know what? When you're trying to do things that nobody's done before, it's not written down in books, is it? You've got to come up with something innovative. Like leaving the largest political force in the world and dealing with a global pandemic in the 21st century. That's not written down in a book how to deal with that. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.